Hello, everyone. This is Javi Badillo. Super excited to have you all. Today's session is What the Text, so a lot of exciting stuff to talk about today. Like I said, my name is Javi Badillo. I'm a account executive with Phone to Action, the host of this session. Phone to Action is the premier digital advocacy solution for nonprofits, especially utilizing Salesforce. Texting has been a bread and butter of what we do, so super exciting to talk about. Today, you all have an awesome host. We have Megan Hinman. She has been an expert on Salesforce. She has been a real expert on, providing practical and actionable insights and how to, enable more women and underrepresented folks in tech to find the same financial and personal freedom she's had. So she's been really huge in the community, ensuring everyone has equal access and really ensuring that everyone's be able to has knowledge of Salesforce to get the most out of it. A couple things I want to highlight. You all will get a recorded version of this webinar. It's going to be sent over after. We have a live chat, so feel free to post any questions you may have. We want to hear from you. This is not going to just be me and Megan talking the whole time. It's a really interactive session. And let's see. And last thing but not least, let's see. Yes. So chat. We got chat down. Super easy. Just post there. We're good to go. But if that's everything, I'm going to turn over to Megan and let her do her thing. Megan's all you.
Awesome. Thanks, Javi. Thanks for being here and having me. Okay, first, just to get a sense of folks in the room, who here has received a text from an organization or political campaign in the last year? Raise your hand, put it in the chat. All right, second question, who here in the last week has received a text referring to fecal matter in their inbox, referring to their dog? Maybe I'm the only one in that category, but I hope y'all understand just the power of text. And I'm so excited to talk about all things texting. But before that, I really want to thank all of the sponsors for this event, in addition to the dozens and dozens of volunteers who have given countless hours to make this happen. These companies deserve our support and really have provided this venue for us. So thank you to them. So why am I even here? Why am I doing this session on texting? Well, it was fall of 2020, and I started volunteering for a bunch of different election campaigns. Some were local candidates, some were statewide propositions, some were national candidates. And I used everything from sending a text on my very personal phone to using different platforms where I was able to send 1,000 texts within a matter of 20 minutes. And I was like, this is actually kind of amazing and awesome. And all my nonprofit peeps should know about this, that this is actually much closer than we think in terms of the technology and the functionality. So that's really my intention, is to bring some of that interest in tech and make it more tangible and actionable for all of our nonprofit friends. This is really geared towards small and medium-sized nonprofits. And I will give a disclaimer that this is very US-centric. I apologize for that, but there are a lot of different regulations that impact different regions. But there are a lot of strategies in here as well that are applicable to folks all around the world. So the first big thing is understanding what your goal is. And there are different types of tools that pertain to different types of goals that you have. So oftentimes it can be really tempting to go into the tool first and be like, what are the things it can do? And then work backwards from that. But I would encourage you to really start with what your actual organizational goal is, how that pertains to it. Now, as I was trying to wrap my head around all the technology of this, it was hard to understand the different functionalities of the different tools and the use cases. Now, I will say that some tools do fall into multiple categories. So for example, we've got Javi here, who has from Phone to Action. It's a very niche tool for advocacy, but you can also do mass texting around it. So there are tools that fall into multiple categories, but you really want to think about what is your why. So to help us understand the different nuances, technical considerations, I have some props. So when I talk about workflow, often known as app A to P, app to person, I'm going to wear my workflow hat. When I'm talking about real human texting, which some folks have referred to as the Wild West of texting, I will be wearing this hat. And for niche tools and bots, I will be wearing this hat. So if I ever start talking about one functionality and not the other, and you catch me, put it in the chat. Have Javi help correct me to make sure I'm talking about the right thing. So start with know your why. The other thing I just want to say about this too is that oftentimes, especially in the case of digital transformation, folks will be like, we need to digitally transform as an organization and let's buy Salesforce. And then we all know what happens when that. Y'all are with me on that, that you can't just like buy a tool and expect it to just work. Really, like starting with the strategy and goals first is the most important. Okay, so before I kind of get into some of the tools and specifics, I want to just take a step back from all of the campaigning I did on local propositions and elections and nationwide elections and talk about some of the lessons learned. So specifically peer-to-peer, which as folks will say has referred to the Wild West, is really more affordable and scalable than you would ever expect. And what we mean by peer-to-peer is actually a person who presses a button and makes that text happen. It doesn't mean that that person has to use their own phone, like I did in some of the organizations I was volunteering for. But it does mean that there's a person at the other end. But the other interesting thing about that is that the recipients have, the expectations are changing. So like y'all have heard, like there's like consumer grade people expect a Google experience between anytime they're receiving information. So there is like this weird dynamic that many folks receiving a text will automatically assume it's a robot, even if it's a real human. But even if it is kind of that application process, they will expect to be able to reply. So this is this like duality here to think about is literally replies. What happens if people replies and how you're going to handle that in no matter which venue you're using. And that also people might think it's a robot no matter what and how you're going to deal with that. Deliverability, opt-outs, lots of confusion there. Even this last week, there was a new regulation regarding short codes that I'm going to talk about in a second. But here's a lot of information kind of coming out of especially the 2020 campaign cycle in the United States. Okay, so I want to talk about some niche tools here. And niche does not mean unimportant or to the side, but niche means they are created to do a very specific use case. And I'm wearing my bot hat. It doesn't mean that these, there's also some more specific literal bot use cases that I'll refer to in a second. But this one on the left, Amplify is an organization near and dear to my heart. If you do not know about Amplify, you should. It's an organization that supports underrepresented folks in tech. They've got classes and courses that you can take to help get certified. They also have Slack channel. And Mowgli has donated, both Mowgli and Phone to Action are sponsors of NP nonprofit Dreamin. Nobody's paid me any money to talk about them, but I wanted to just recognize their participation. Okay, so, but this is an actual real live text to donate link, which is Amplify to 94069. So if you're feeling inspired, you really want to give back and you want to try out some texting tech at the same time, that link is active and is a way to donate. Now I want to make a distinction between text to donate and text to give. So text to give is coming through the phone carriers and then it appears on somebody's phone bill. But what's more common now for many nonprofits is text to donate, which is essentially kind of a mobile friendly giving page and sometimes some additional functionality built behind that. The other kind of niche tool that I want to call out is advocacy and direct advocacy to elected officials. So there are a bunch of tools, but whenever I have a great experience filling out a petition, I look at the tech behind it and it's almost always Phone to Action. Again, like Javi didn't pay me to say this, but I will tell you like this fall, I got an email from an organization that was like, call Governor Newsom and tell him that you want him to do something. So I was like, all right, I'll click the link. And I almost fell out of my chair because like somebody from his staff actually picked up the phone. I was like, what? This is crazy. And so I said my piece about how I wanted him to sign this bill. And that was it. So these are specific niche use cases. Sometimes there are tools that can do more than one thing, but think about what your goal is. And if there is a niche use case that you're looking for, look for that tool that fits that bill. I'm going to talk about bots in a little in kind of towards the end and talk about what's really, there's a lot of confusion about like AI and bots and what that really means. But in terms of like real bot use cases that has like machine learning and you can ask a bunch of questions and refer that back as a little bit more complicated use case. Okay, so we're going to do a case study for an app to person use case, which has a bunch of different tools. So I have to thank my client Douglas for this because I was like, Doug, give me an actual use case that you want to implement. He was like, okay, we're going to text people 2 days before the event starts with a reminder message. All right, and so these are some of the tools listed below that can handle this kind of application to texting use case. There are more nuances of this. There are a bunch more tools than these. I wanted to give you an example too. And one of the things that I did in creating this presentation, because we only got 20 minutes, is I started creating a PDF of like all the information that couldn't come in here, including kind of short reviews and summaries of about 20 different texting tools. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to get that PDF. Of course, you know how you're going to get that. You're going to text a short code in and you're going to get a PDF via email at the end, but I'll show you how to get that. And I wanted to let you know there's a ton of more information besides what I'm able to cover here. So in this use case, we want to send auto reminders. So as we're looking at this use case, some of this highlighting might be hard to read, but I'm going to go over a little bit virtually. So these are the kind of things when you think about your goal in mind. First, like get your goal down. Forget about looking at the tool first. Like you want to be super clear on what you care about. So I want to just point out that if there's a time sensitivity to it, it's a workflow. Okay, so you all automatically want a tool that has a workflow. You want templates because you want to be able to insert the date and time in there. The other thing to point out, the Google Map is the multimedia link. Those are different pricing, right? So oftentimes some tool includes that functionality, sometimes it doesn't. There's the concept of if it's on a custom object or standard object, where the mobile number is stored. Now you might already be like, Megan, this is like so overwhelming, like it's too much. But actually, like I want to just emphasize to you that this technology exists. It is fairly affordable in the whole scheme of things, depending on what you want to do. And it's like totally within your ability to implement. What I will say though, is that it's not without caution with something that's so tightly integrated into your system. This is where you really want a tool, if you're storing this data in Salesforce, to integrate into your Salesforce, because it's really tied in to your data and driving from the data there. So because it's so tightly integrated in your data, you want to make sure that you're spending the organizational time thinking about the workflow. So for example, if someone says they want to get reminders via email instead of text, do you have a way to track that? Do you have a way to make your literal process builder or flow in Salesforce kind of branch off? So these are the things that to think about as you integrate into your system.
Megan,
okay.
we do have a question from the audience.
Oh, perfect.
Shiva, she's asking, what is the best texting tool for bulk texting? So it sounds like, what do you recommend for sending to massively large lists, if that even is a good way?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so this is like, so this case study is like this automated where it happens in the background and there. And most of the text tools in that application to app to person use case, most of them can bulk text, right? as well as a lot of the niche tools can bulk text as well. And so in that case, you might see somebody texting from like a Salesforce campaign or sometimes from a report. But that's a great segue into this other use case of bulk texting. Okay, so here we go. Changing my hats. All right, so here's another use case of bulk texting. So this is where literally you've got a list. Let's say you've got a list of 5,000 people. You want to text them for a specific reason. You want to get them to come to an event. You want to get them to do something else. So this is a case where I used a bunch of different tools, and for nonprofits, there's a open source framework called Spoke that is, the actual framework is free for nonprofits, but you have to pay for the Twilio messaging costs. And I'm going to talk about pricing in a second in terms of like understanding the cost around messaging. But this is another great option for mass texting. In this case, it's not coming from Salesforce. It's in a third-party system. And there's other tools too that I'm going to mention in the PDF that are specifically for peer-to-peer texting. And that also means that some of the tools that are in that application to peer texting can do mass texting as well. But there's a difference between having a system send the mass text and a person. And there's different regulations around that as well. Some of which I've only begun to scratch the surface on terms of the literal regulations around it. But if there's actually a person on the other end, then it's in a different category from the carriers, which can be to your benefit, and which is why from the campaign people are calling it the Wild West, because it's like at this point kind of unregulated. But there's also kind of considerations for this. So if you have a mass texting event, as opposed to just like send everyone on my list from Salesforce a blast message, then you want to think about like who's recruiting the volunteers. Like oftentimes in those scenarios, we would have a separate kind of Slack or Zoom set up so that we could answer questions for folks if folks can edit templates. And I'm not kidding you that like I personally probably sent about, I had about 5,000 texting conversations in 1 hour in one volunteer session. So it's like really, and those are interactive too. Like many people would be like, tell me more about this. And I'd like give them additional information about the specifics they were asking for. So it's a very, very powerful option. In this case, I wouldn't necessarily say that you would want it to be integrated to Salesforce, right? Because A, there's volume considerations. B, who's this user? You don't want all your volunteers having like logins necessarily to all your data. You can have an administrator upload the list. It's a very kind of time boxed in terms of how folks are coming through. So that's another consideration in terms of your goal. If it's mass texting to potentially a smaller list around, and you want them to reply and kind of have it come back to your main organizational effort, or it's whether it's kind of like a one-time deal.
And Meg, we have a couple questions that seem to have broken off from that.
Yeah.
Great question from Shiva again. Thank you so much for being so active. Yeah. How do you get opt-ins from bulk texting? So how, if we do a bulk, how do we get folks in the system first off? We have a question from Robert Foley around the Wild Wild West person to person texting. How do you stop doing that without breaking those connections? How do you move from, doing one-to-one texting without, ruining the relationship essentially with the person?
Okay, great. So the first question is think around opt-ins and opt-outs, right? And the second question is around like how to maintain the relationship and whether that's important to you in terms of understanding the context of the relationship if people are doing this peer-to-peer texting. So the first question about opt-ins and opt-outs, like that is like the biggest thing to think about in terms of all of this, both in terms of a tool selection and in terms of an internal process by which you're going to track this specifically in Salesforce, if that's where you're tracking kind of some of your master opt-in and opt-outs. And one of the things that I lay out in the PDF is some nuance around tracking kind of like pick list values around opt-ins and opt-outs. Specifically, like somebody might want text opt-ins for reminders, but not necessarily your marketing messaging, for example. Oftentimes the tools themselves will have methodologies around opt-outs. So that's something to think about and to understand, especially the peer-to-peer. If you're using this third-party system, then you got to import the opt-outs into your existing system. The second question was about the peer-to-peer and maintain the relationship. So if these peer-to-peers are kind of spun up by this tool, it doesn't mean that you as an administrator can't go in, depending on the tool, and actually manage it to see all the conversations, to be able to continue those. But the real question is, if that conversation is integral into your program services, you may want to not do this peer-to-peer approach and have something more tightly integrated, for example, to be able to kind of surface that on that person's contact record and be able to understand the nuance around that. So I know, we're actually almost done. So I have a few more things that I want to talk about, and then hopefully we'll have time for more questions at the end too.
Absolutely.
Just understanding some of this vocab is important as we talk about price. Short code, long code, and keyword are all important as we talk about price. The other thing that's really important is thinking about segments and credits. I really, I like the screenshot from Value Text. I haven't used that tool. I can't speak to that tool specifically, but I like how they show you what the pricing is around the segments in the WhatsApp. And because that's really confusing, and that came up from the 2020 cycle, is like different folks charging in different ways. So think about the cost as being not just the message, but usually the reply as well, okay? And a lot of that's coming from the base carrier that's powering this whole texting system, which in many cases is Twilio, which is like the platform underneath the whole thing, all of this working. So something to think about, again, peer-to-peer, you're having volunteers, you probably don't want a per user cost, right? You want something that's just there. But to think about kind of both of the pricing cost. So this is breaking news, like literally this last week. I'm going to show you a short code at the end where you can get this PDF. It's going to stop working after March. I'm going to have to use a long code because of different carriers. So just know that this is continuing to have regulation. And this is kind of my last slide here before we kind of can answer some more questions too, is kind of bringing back to the questions that were asked before, which is, thank you for those, is like really understanding how critical those conversations are to your delivery and whether they should be in Salesforce or not. The other thing I want to point out is one of my favorite technologists who focus on integrations, her name is Bhavna, and she runs a company called 3 Moons. She was talking about how an email marketing tool, their standard integration with Salesforce, used one API call per email message, and essentially like broke the whole thing. She couldn't even get into the developer console. So this is something to think about with your integrations, is like how are they dealing with volume? How does that impact the rest of your system? Other things like if you have a tool that you want to have a survey, an app to person tool that does a survey, like how did you like our event? 3, do you want that information tracked on that person's record for all time or not? So this is your chance to interact with a short code and a keyword. And so I seriously got a little bit crazy. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't fit all this information in. So it ended up to be 13 pages, y'all. So I'm sorry, but you can get more information for this. This only works for US, so apologies for that. But if you want this, and just kind of tag me on social or send me an email. My email's kind of exactly what you would expect. And I'll send you the document, or you can like DM me in the nonprofit dream. I don't want to put it in the recording for all time, but so that's what I have for you. I think we've got a few more minutes for questions, Javi.
We have about 5 more minutes, so plenty of time for questions. So we have a couple questions, so definitely we will tackle them all. So first question from Robert, great question. He's asking, if they're right now just simply using iPhones to text people, what's the best recommendation for transitioning away from that to an actual platform without causing duplication?
So I think this is where I think some of these app to person tools are way more affordable and in your realm than you might expect. So I'm gonna go back here for just like my, so they're in this yellow category. There are a bunch of tools with integrations with Salesforce that are fairly affordable, right? And I'm talking about like, let's just say you have like $5,000 a year and you want to do something very simple, just like text your contacts or something. Then you can use one of these tools that have integrations to Salesforce and do it. That's what I would say. And then as a second level, I would recommend, if you're doing mass texting with volunteers and things, to transition to Spoke. Because it's very, very efficient and you can handle a ton of conversation. It does have some setup, but then it gets out of your phone. And there's also, think about WhatsApp too. So a lot of communities are more into WhatsApp. So just think about that, both including domestically.
Awesome, thank you. Another great question that I get a lot from for organizations I speak with is, when you have a bulk list, how can you tell if a number is a cell phone so they can get text messages, or simply a landline, they can't get text messages? You certainly don't want to waste any messages to landline, so being very proactive on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I've seen, some of the technology tools will scrub the numbers for you. And some of them you need to scrub them in advance. Javi, what does phone to action do?
We're able to scrub. We're able to tell. We're not gonna send a text if we know the number is not a cell. The software because we don't want you all to waste your time texting a landline.
Yeah. So I would say I've seen that to be common among a lot of vendors. So that's a great question. And honestly, like, that's a lot of data maintenance. I would rather have my tool figure that out for me, right?
And Megan, that's what you're talking about. It's just not just the software. The support that you get with the companies that you go these software with, they're going to provide you the guidance. I saw a lot of questions about legal questions. The companies provide that as guidance. Bulk versus not bulk, going to provide you that guidance. So always something to consider when adopting new technologies is that you're going to have the support of the vendor that you go with.
I actually, like, now I feel like I'm on an infomercial, but I was literally going to say the same thing about just the regulations, because this is where, we're in pandemic time. So like, I'm just interested in partnerships more than vendors. And so I will say, for example, one client that we have who's using a true bot scenario with a company called AdmitHub, and they're doing like literal like training of this tool to provide questions and answers, and people can text in. It's intense, both capacity wise and time wise, but they also view this vendor like, so it's not cheap to do some of these like actual bot type scenarios, but that vendor's kind of working as a partner with them. And kind of what you're speaking to, Javi, is like all this regulations, like, I mean, even if you in it every day, it's really hard to keep track of. And so I don't know, in this day and age, I'm all about partnerships. I am like not about like, I'm like here for people that like, it's not just like a transactional relationship. So I think that's a great point.
Excellent. We are at 1:30. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. So
join us. Megan, thank you again. Do you have a wrap up, Megan? Or
oh no, I just wanted to say, like, here's like, you're supposed to go back to the reception area and everything. And if you missed that short code, and you want it, just like find me. I'll be around today in the event, so just find me. So thanks for coming. Thanks, Javi, for moderating and for everybody for attending the questions. We appreciate you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.